content piece, and we're doing the French Revolution in a whirlwind. Todd's gonna try to jump through that very quickly.
Yes, and Katie's driving today, and I said, you got to push me through this because we want to leave a lot of time at the end. So here we go. We're going to talk about causes, events, and consequences of the French Revolution. This is part of the CED, and let's start by contextualizing the French Revolution. What was France like on the eve of the French Revolution? First of all, it's based on a social dynamic called the Three Estates. Roughly the population in France in 1789 is about 25 million people, but who are these three estates? And we have this pyramid because there are fewer and then there are more. So at the very top, the first estate is the clergy. They are about 0.05% of the total population. They own approximately 10% of the land. They don't have to pay taxes. There is the second estate, which is the nobility. They're about 1.5% of the whole population. There are two different types of nobility: nobility of the sword, nobility of the robe. They own about a quarter of the land. They don't pay taxes. And they also have the positions in government. So if there is ever an attempt at tax reform, nobility says, no, thanks, we're not going to do that. And then there is everyone else, the third estate, 24.5 million people. But within the third estate, there is the top level, which is the bourgeoisie. There is the middle, which is the working or wage class, wage earners, the working class, kind of your urban poor. And then there are the peasants. Of 86% of the population of France works the land. And they own only about 40% of that land, and they're very resentful of all the privileges that the people above them get. So that contextualizes what France was like on the eve of revolution. So there's an economic situation in France that's bad, a lot of debt from wars. America played a role in that. And to make matters worse, there are bad grain harvests and prices for bread start to go up, but wages do not. And so this causes outrage and riots in the streets. There's a depressed economy, and the king at this time is Louis XVI, and his finance minister has brought forward a proposal to impose taxes on all property that would include the aristocracy and the nobility. And he says, we need this because it's the only way we're going to be able to get the economy under control. He called an assembly, mostly of aristocratic high-ranking clergy, and they don't approve of such tax. And so we're going to have to call a meeting of the Estates Generales. This body had not met since 1614. It is now 1789. So this demonstrates absolutism doesn't call in others to discuss things. They are monarchs. And so, but because the crisis is so bad, they're going to bring them in. And here comes the third estate. The third estates wanted both more deputies and a vote rather than to vote by estate. So the last slide, we see the first estate, second estate, third estate. And everybody kind of gets one vote for representing the estate, but you saw that the vast majority of people are represented in the third estate, and they're like, no, this is not going to work. And so they can't even get to the issues because they're deadlocked over how to vote on the issues. And the third estate walks out, declares itself a national assembly, and leaves the Estates General. Here's the rainy day that I was talking about in the opening. So they'd been kind of meeting on their own, and then all of a sudden, the day they come to the meeting door, and for some reason it's locked. They construct in their own heads, and that the guards must have done it, and that somebody's out to get them. And while this is happening, it starts to rain, and they rush over to a nearby tennis court, indoor tennis court, and they take the famous tennis court oath. The king responds, it's bad. He assembles the troops, and of course that makes all the situation tension just rise up more and more, and it signals the possibility of trying to get rid of the National Assembly. And so then on July 14th, 1789, hundreds of people storm the Bastille. This is this huge armory and prison, and they're going there to get gunpowder and weapons, and it gets really violent, and they cut off the head of the guard at the Bastille. The king is forced to recognize then, because things get way out of hand, that the National Assembly. But then there are rumors in the countryside, and the peasants begin to revolt. So there's some truth, but there's constructed truth. And before you know it, there is killing in the countryside, and there is this third estate, which has taken over Paris. That chaos is called the Great Fear. And what they want, the peasants want to abolish these feudal privileges that the nobility had, and they want to do away with the tithe to the church. By August, so that was on July 14th. By the way, July 14th is it's Bastille Day. It's like their Independence Day. It's celebrated similar to our Independence Day. August 27th, 1789, the National Assembly issues a document called the Declaration of Rights of Man and of Citizen, calling for the Enlightenment principles, including equality before the law, individual freedoms, judicial rights, representative government. That's important because it's going to get at the DBQ that we're talking about later today. But it goes on. Here we go. 1789, still 1780 to 91. By October, there are about 7,000 women who march to Versailles. They break into the Queen's chamber. They do not like Antoinette, and they kill several of the guards. They want to bring the royal family and force them back to go to Paris. They don't like the royal family living in Versailles and all this luxury. The next day, the National Assembly follows the king to Paris, and by June of 1790, the king is sworn to uphold a constitution, and the lawmaking power now resides in the National Assembly. So we've gone from absolute monarchy, and now we are a constitutional monarchy. It's moving more to the center, if you will, of a political spectrum. At this point, the king and queen attempt to leave France. They're fearful. Antoinette is not French. She is Austrian. And so they're trying to go back to Austria, but they are recognized, and rumors spread that you're trying to commit treason, and they're returned to France and imprisoned. Having already brought the Catholic Church under the control of the state, the civil constitution of the clergy requires priests to swear an oath to the revolution rather than swearing an oath to the Pope. So we have all these different elements going on with the revolution at once. By September, the National Assembly passes the Constitution of 1791, and it broadens rights for women. It legalizes divorce, the inheritance of property. However, it excludes women from political life, and Olympe de Gouges will publish her Declaration of the Rights of Women in response as a rebuttal to that. So we went from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy to republic, Constitution of 1791, in a really short amount of time at the revolution in France. Oh, but it's not done yet. Next slide. Oh my gosh. War in Republican France. The rest of Europe sees what's going on and like, hey, you need to calm down. Prussia and Austria declare the Declaration of Pillnitz. It's a real thing, promising to restore order to the monarch of France. They say, if you don't get things under control, we're going to come in there and we'll get things under control. Well, the revolutionaries in France are like, oh, really? They turn around, declare war on Austria, which the king supported, believing France will lose because Louis thinks that he'll get back. By July, the war is going badly for France, and the Austrian Prussia issue the Brunswick Manifesto, threatening to destroy Paris if harm comes to the monarchs who are still imprisoned. In August, a crowd attacks the palace, and a new, more radical national convention is declared. And by September, the National Convention will abolish the monarchy, declare France a republic, 1792, and they're going to redo the calendar and call 1792 year number 1. By 1793, Louis XVI is placed on trial for treason, found guilty, and he is executed. And this has France entering the reign of terror. An image there of the execution of Louis. It's at the Place de la Concorde in Paris, big square that you can see today.
Right.
And finally, April 1793, the convention formed the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds so nice, but it's really a 12-person executive body. Maximilien Robespierre, a Jacobin, will hold basically dictatorial powers, and he'll use that power. He'll then collaborate with the sans-culottes, these are the working people of France, and enforce compliance, putting more than 40,000 French men and women on trial for political crimes. 40,000, and it's either you're with the revolution or you're against the revolution. And you can imagine how the rumors spread about others. Many of these are executed or die in prison. This is known as the Reign of Terror, and terror is used as a weapon against anybody suspected of opposing the revolution. By July of 1794, what is the 9th of Thermidor, because they also renamed the months. So there's no longer July, it's Thermidor. Robespierre himself was guillotined. Many of supporters and educated middle class members of the third estate reassert their authority, and this is the Thermidoran reaction. And if it feels chaotic, that's because it is. And the National Convention writes a new constitution granting executive power to the 5-man body called a Directory, and it's going to rule France for 4 years. But at this point, people are exhausted, and they want new rule and they want consistency and they want things to calm down, and enter a general, a strong man named Napoleon Bonaparte, who will stage a coup d'etat. And Katie gets to tell you all about him.
I'm exhausted.
I know.
Yeah, we're going to go through Napoleon also really quickly. And I want to stop for a minute and let you know that we know that was so fast. I spent a lot of time in my own class on the French Revolution. You can go back to the AP Daily videos where they are much more accessible. We just wanted to give you some of the highlights. So, and that's all I'm going to do for Napoleon right now, is talk about this historical development, that as first consul and then emperor, he undertakes reforms that will take away or curtail some rights and manipulate power impulses behind a facade of representative institutions. So we'll have some reforms and we'll take away some rights. And that also speaks to what your homework is going to be. So pay attention. And so you see this very iconic picture there of Napoleon on the right by Jacques-Louis David. He appealed to many who were looking for, as Todd said, to an end to the upheaval. Abby Sieyès said, confidence from below, authority from above. He's named first consul after his coup. In 1799, he ousts the rest of those 4 directors and disbands the legislature at bayonet point. And then he starts to implement his own policies. And it's here where we really see sort of the enduring legacy of Napoleon. He maintains order and works out important compromises. His very important, the Napoleonic Code, will grant equality. And look, I mean, that's something that is definitely continuing the ideas of the French Revolution. For the middle class, will safeguard their right to property. He'll confirm the gains of the peasants, centralize the government and make it so much more efficient and strengthen its bureaucracy. And he grants amnesty to the nobles because he understands the value of that. He signs the Concordat of 1801 with the Catholic Church, which guarantees freedom of worship for Catholics. He was very savvy in how he used religion. He brought order and stability to France, and he did continue some of the ideals, but he also betrayed the ideals of the French Revolution by violating the rights of free speech and press and free elections. Women lost rights under Napoleon. They had no political rights. They lost many of the gains that they'd made during the French Revolution. The Napoleonic Code reestablished the traditional hierarchy of the male domination in the family. So here you're looking at the picture, another Jacques-Louis David, the very famous coronation of Napoleon. And so we are going to whiz through this. I'm not getting into his wars. There's absolutely a video for that if that's something that you need a little bit of reminder about. But he fought many wars. He used the fear of a Bourbon conspiracy to proclaim himself emperor. And eventually by 1807, he's in control of most of continental Europe. He's placed members of his family on the thrones of all of these other places. And he has this grand empire, which basically means control. He introduces French laws and abolishes feudal dues and serfdom, but he also levies heavy taxes. So he may initially be met with a lot of positive response, but that doesn't necessarily last. Eventually, he is going to be defeated by the Fourth Coalition. That's Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain. And he will abdicate the throne in 1814. The Bourbon dynasty is restored, and he's sent to Elba off the coast of Italy. And then he escapes from Elba in his so-called 100 days. He will reignite his wars of expansion and is ultimately defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. And then he's exiled to St. Helena off the coast of Africa. And if you want an interesting experience, Google where that is and see how far off the coast of Africa that is. All right, the last content piece we're going to do today before Todd gets into structure for you is to talk about the Congress of Vienna. And so after that defeat of Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna, so important, attempts to restore the balance of power and contain the danger of revolutionary or nationalistic upheavals in the future. So here we have sort of a look at all of these dignitaries meeting in Austria to undo Napoleon and to really make sure another Napoleon doesn't happen. So after the defeat of Napoleon, we have that quadruple alliance along with a representative from France that are going to restore the balance of power and contain that danger of any more revolution. And there are 4 main principles we want to talk about with Vienna. The first one is legitimacy. So we're going to get rid of those Bonapartes that were on all the thrones, and we're going to restore to the nations the legitimate monarchs that were in line for the thrones. So the power in the countries reverted to the monarch, the church, and the aristocracy as they had been prior. Collective security. We're going to see this idea out of this Conference of Vienna of the great powers meeting periodically to ensure that there's going to be peace. We're going to see the concert of Europe, the concert system, where everyone's going to work together to provide this degree of security. And then we have the idea of balance of power that goes hand in hand with the concert of Europe. They want to have an equilibrium. They're going to create buffer states to surround France just to make sure there's not another revolution. And there's going to be all sorts of territorial changes that happen because of that. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is going to be a combination of Austria, Netherlands, and the Dutch Republic. And we're going to strengthen Piedmont, Sardinia on France's border, and Prussia is going to gain territory as well. And then, as is very common at the end of a conflict like this, there's compensation. And the victors agree that each of them should receive compensation in the form of territory. And an example of this is Austria, that lost the Netherlands but gains Italian provinces. All right, that was really fast.
That was really fast, but you did a great